Hopefully you've all had plenty of coffee to keep you caffeinated and awake after lunch. So, a bit about me. Been involved in electronics, radio and the IT industry over many years. Worked with using those skills for various forms of emergency communications. AREC is amateur radio emergency communications, CD is civil defence, and SAR is search and rescue. And applying mainly radio, but in more recent times IT as well, into those disciplines. And about the last 10 years been involved with the Red Cross and the international side, where I've in particular brought together very strongly the IT and radio sides. A little bit about Red Cross. There are national societies in most countries around the world, 192. And at the international level, there's a number of different aspects. ICRC is the International Committee of Red Cross, and they mainly deal with humanitarian law, conflict situations. They are largely responsible for the Geneva Conventions. The Federation, or IFRC, is the International Federation, is an umbrella or secretariat organisation across the national societies around the world. And then we've got some tools of the Federation. FACT is Field Assessment and Coordination Team. They are the ones that first in after a disaster to help the local government, the local Red Cross National Society, assess what's needed, help with coordination with other players in the humanitarian space, and work to determine what's best for the needs of the disaster. Part of that is calling on the ERUs, or emergency response units, to help out. And they're mainly used in the large-scale disasters. And then for smaller or regional, there's the RDRTs, or regional disaster response teams. So what is an ERU? Mainly about standardization. So there are a number of ERUs all around the world of different types, which we'll come to shortly. But it's about standardising the equipment, standardising the training, so that when we're deployed, if we have to hand over to another team, everything will tie in. We need to be ready to deploy at short notice, and the notice sort of varies a little bit, but usually we're heading off within a few days of the disaster. We can't just go in uninvited. We have to be invited by the local national society, and hence by the local government. And we need to be self-sufficient, in particular for the first month, but we can be there for up to 4 months under the rules of engagement for ERUs. And so typically our team would rotate through a month at a time. About 5 years ago now, we standardised on MikroTik as a part of our standard equipment. We started with particular products at that time, but we've sort of moved away from that to a generic description because, as we all know, the products change fairly rapidly. But we started out with the RV751 series for the small office environments, the 1200 for larger operations, and SXTs for point-to-point links. We're still using Ruckus for larger scale Wi-Fi, but we're hoping that eventually some of the MikroTik Wi-Fi solutions will be able to replace that, and we'll have a seamless MikroTik solution. I'm sure there's no surprise to any of you, but why did we go with MikroTik? Well, at the time we had to replace some outdated equipment that was our current standard, the old Linksys WRT. But the sheer power, flexibility and the low cost of the MikroTik devices made them really attractive. So as I said, standards change over time. There's an international forum of the representatives from the different IT and Telecom ERUs that discuss the standards about every year or two. And we've now updated as technology is updated and using later devices, but we've sort of moved to a more generic specification of minimum functionality. So to some extent, the different ERUs may have slightly different models, and often we have them sitting in a warehouse for some years until we're deployed, so they'll often be older units. But the consistency of router OS makes that quite possible, where we can just update the router OS and away we go. So as I said, there's different types of ERUs. IT Telecom is just one of them, and our role is to support all of these other ERUs in their IT and telecommunications requirements. Some of them have more of a beneficiary-facing focus, so relief and cash distribution, actually distributing goods to those that need them. For Red Cross, it's mostly non-food items like tarpaulins, shelter kits, kitchen sets, hygiene kits. Occasionally they do distribute food, and more, especially if markets are up and running quickly, we'll distribute cash so that the beneficiaries can determine what they need most by using cash rather than just taking the goods that we have. Healthcare is another big one, again working directly with beneficiaries, and that ranges from small mobile health clinics right through to massive field hospitals. Water and sanitation and hygiene messaging is another big area, and they have a scalable set of modules dependent on population, and they're providing water and sanitation needs for populations of 10, 20, 40,000 at a time. Logistics is another one like us that is providing support services to the other ERUs, and Basecamp is one that provides an area for those of us that respond to work out of, and accommodation if needed in situations where everything is completely wiped out. So that's a shot of Basecamp as it was in Tacloban in the Philippines after the super typhoon went through there. The different deployments we've been to, just giving you an idea. New Zealand Red Cross IT and Telecom's only been around since 2008, so we've only been involved in some of the later events, but our colleagues from around the world have been to some of the other ones. And as I say, mostly it's really large-scale disasters that we called into. Occasionally there's smaller scale. Most recently, Dominica, a hurricane through the Caribbean last year. Small island of 72,000 total population, but makes it quite small scale compared to the Nepals and Philippines. But the island was basically totally devastated. You know, they had nowhere to go to get away from it. So the Federation helped out there. This is a photo from Haiti, 2008, so a year and a half before the earthquake there. They had 5 hurricanes in a row, massive flooding to one of their main cities, Gonaive. So a few details about some of our responses. The Philippines, the super typhoon, back in November 2013. At that stage, the MikroTiks were fairly new to our kit, so we had a bit of a mixture of some of the older kit and some of the MikroTiks. But the disaster itself, massive winds, massive storm surge, 16 million people affected in some way, over 6,000 deaths, 4 million displaced, over 1 million homes damaged or destroyed. So that puts the scale of things in perspective. You compare that to likes of even our disaster here, Canterbury, where I come from. You know, it just is a drop in the bucket, so to speak. The reason we're there providing IT and telecommunications support is because the infrastructure is badly damaged. This one's a little bit harder to see, but this was a big microwave tower and microwave dish completely toppled. Nepal, a little bit different. It was earthquake rather than storm. 2 earthquakes in a row, 7.9 on Anzac Day, and then a slightly smaller one a couple of weeks later. In their case, 57 districts affected out of 75, I think, but 14 severely affected. And the construction there was such that things were pretty bad. They did dodge a bullet a little bit. Some of their predictions were for an 8+ magnitude in the Kathmandu Valley, and for that they were expecting 10 times worse. So we had about 8,000 killed in this one. Again, millions affected, injured, houses destroyed. And the bottom half is the response from Red Cross. Volunteers, both local and international, health services, water and sanitation, tarpaulins, and relief being the main things, and then cash grants later on. So the Red Cross response in these big disasters is big. It takes a lot of coordination, a lot of work by all those different facets, and as I said, our main aim is to help them do their job. This is a health clinic in a fairly remote part of Nepal. It was up the hill a bit from them, had previously been a hospital, but it had been shut down a year or so earlier due to an NGO that had been running it had run out of money and left the country. While this wasn't a field hospital, they were sort of providing, to some extent, hospital-level services. I think they moved an X-ray machine down from the old hospital. The buildings were fairly badly damaged down into the field clinic. As I said, most recently, Dominica. There have been 2 strong hurricanes through the Caribbean. It's a small island nation, and it was pretty much completely decimated. But like New Zealand, they depend on the nature and tourism. We have Lord of the Rings. They had Pirates of the Caribbean was their sort of calling card, and they were known as the Nature Island. But it was try that one again. Yeah, what's happened here? Excuse me a sec. My battery's dying. So power is one of the big challenges we have. In Dominica, I was there for 6 weeks, and we were running off a generator that the local National Society had for pretty much all of that time. So it was about 6 weeks before the grid came back on. For us here in New Zealand, it's a poignant reminder that planning's going on around things like the Alpine Fault, expecting a 8+, and in the Wellington region also, if their fault goes, they're talking about potentials of the whole of the South Island and even up into Wellington being without power for at least a week. And obviously any technology we use is dependent on power. So we do take some small generators with us as well, but mostly we're dependent on local resources for larger scale power. The big base camps, they are massive. They take in a lot of equipment with them, including generators. And likewise the field hospitals and even some of the health clinics will take a generator in with them. Crink, crink. Dominica, as I was saying, the pretty much wiped out. The nature island was pretty much denuded of all its greenery, and the nature of these hurricanes is again, dependent on which side of the fence you sit on regarding climate change, but they certainly seem to be getting worse and worse. Right, so it was a much smaller response, and in this case, instead of being part of an ERU, I was actually part of the FACT team, so part of the early response and sort of the management of the response, and I had a single person ERU come in mainly to provide the satellite internet. So the IT and Telecom emergency response, our main function is to support the Federation's response and the local national society's response, recovery and capacity building. And most of New Zealand's been involved in all of the ones I've been talking about, Philippines, Nepal, and Dominica, and with assistance from other ERUs. In particular, USA have been one of the main providers of internet by satellite. New Zealand has now just got an international capable VSAT that we'll have as part of our kit from going forward. But an example was Nepal was one of the bigger ones. We had over 20 staff over 5 weeks. 12 of those were Kiwis, the other were a mix of Americans and some from Austria. And we take equipment in with us, quite a bit, up to a tonne. It's not quite as much as we used to when we supported HF radio. And wherever possible, we'll take that in as excess baggage. So we have a few challenges checking in at the airline. Sometimes they say, no, you can't take all of that, and so some of it will get shipped separately, and that's usually where we have problems with customs and things, whereas if we bring it in with us, it usually gets across the border a lot easier. So again, as I think everybody in the room knows, everybody has to have internet. It doesn't matter what they do, where they are, they need internet. So that's one of our main roles. And as I say, primarily it's through satellite technology that in the first instance we'll be providing it. We do have some small, easy deployable units, but they're expensive to run. So we'll try and move to the larger, slightly more complex VSAT setups after that. And wherever possible, we'll move as quickly as we can to a local provider, whether it be a WISP or wired, or in some cases even a local provider providing satellite connection. We'll set up offices for the response, so usually there'll be a main sort of headquarters that the Federation will set up. That may be directly in conjunction with the local national society. It depends on how badly affected their offices have been. Sometimes we'd be set up in a space like this, and we'd pack 50 odd people in here operating as an office and providing Wi-Fi and general IT support in that space. And part of it is all that equipment we bring in, pretty much all of it gets handed over to the local national society before we leave. Some of it, like the satellite internet kind of equipment, which has a high running cost, we'll bring back. But anything that will be useful to them going forward gets left behind, so we need to do handover and training and documentation for that. So some of the things we do with the MikroTiks, we failover or load balancing to some extent. So as I said initially, we'll be working with VSAT. Sometimes due to the way satellites work in sun, you can get blind spots for a while, and so it's not 100%. So if we have a backup of some sort, and where that might be hotel Wi-Fi that we connect into through a CPE, or it might be a 3 or 4G, possibly through a USB dongle, or I'm looking forward to having a play with some of these new LTE products going forward from here. And in some cases where we've got access to a local provider, in those first few weeks they're likely to be unstable, to say the least. So again, having that ability to either share our load between the VSAT and them or fail over between them. The VSATs typically we're only getting 2 to 4 megabits out of, and we're often supporting over 80 devices connected. This is a shot from the Philippines, an old RV1200. It was getting so hot there we had to add the external fan to give it some cooling. You could almost fry eggs on the damn thing at one stage. We were having a few problems with it going down on us. So certainly temperature ratings is one of our challenges, and I'll talk briefly at the end about some of the work we do in the Pacific, where again temperature and environment are a big thing. So yeah, primarily gateway routers to whatever the internet connection is, and as I say, those multiple connections if we have them. Access points spread out through a building or different offices. Quite often point-to-point links between our base and possibly a warehouse or other facilities that are nearby that we need to connect. And as I said, we're often operating off a very limited internet connection, so we've been working with all sorts of different ways of filtering and blocking different traffic to try and make sure that the most important traffic gets priority. So yeah, we've certainly played around with simple queues, interface queues, some of the layer 7 filters, and I'll certainly be taking back some notes from this morning's presentation about how to do some of that properly. And some of the challenges around either blocking or limiting traffic to some of these sites, partly because it's SSL, partly because of their content management systems they've got in place. There are certainly some challenges there, but we're certainly keen to learn as much as we can about ways we can improve on some of that. And one of our team came up with a script where we basically tag any devices that look like they're a mobile device and put them into a list which gets lower priority. So if you look like an iPhone or an Android, then you'll end up in that queue. So some of the types of setups in the Philippines, we had sort of multiple bases of operation. So we had in Cebu, one of the biggest cities there, we had a logistics and warehouse facility. So we were providing internet and Wi-Fi there. In Tacloban at the base camp, we had a VSAT there and we're providing internet and Wi-Fi there. And also at some of the local Red Cross offices, we were providing internet and Wi-Fi. So we had a mixture of devices we were making use of. I think at that stage we were still using Ruckus for point-to-point bridge, but nowadays we use the SXTs. So yeah, a lot of it's ad hoc. So these are possibly just access points and then providing wired connections to printers, etc. In this case, I think that may have just been some storage, shared storage. So yeah, hung up on poles and tents. In Nepal, similar. We had at that stage we had a bit more recent MikroTik equipment. So we had a 2011 in the base at Kathmandu, and eventually we ended up with a 50 megabit fibre connection there. Typically in Nepal at the time, most businesses, because of cost, were running fibre, but only 2 or 4 megabit. And it was strung on poles, and one day we lost our connection, and it was because there was in the hotel just around the corner from us, there was a big meeting on, and they were putting in security cameras, and while they were putting these security cameras up on poles, they'd managed to knock some of the fibre connections off, so all sorts of challenges. And we used quite a few 751s, etc., as access points, and we even used an SXT as an access point, beaming it down to a warehouse facility a little bit distant from the main headquarters. Go back. Yep, so the earlier shot of the health clinic was and I talked about the hospital up the hill a bit. They actually, while the buildings were largely damaged, they set up the accommodation for the staff up near there, and so they set up this point-to-point link between the camp and the accommodation area. An example of this was in the main headquarters, so that was a fibre splice connection and a media converter. So the main router and a switch, and here we had a 751, I think it was, acting as a CPE to connect to the hotel Wi-Fi as a backup link. We stuck them up in all sorts of places to provide a reasonably high density coverage of access points. As I say, looking forward to some of the new access point products as they come on stream to replace some of these. This was in another health clinic in a remote area, again set up on a tent, so the modem for the VSAT and then the router for that smaller operation there. And again, Dominica, in that case, there was only 2 of us doing the support. We had, even though it was a small operation, we still had up to 60 to 80 devices at times connecting to our network, which initially was off a little router. Later on, we upgraded that to a 2011 that came in to us later on. We had SXT bridge to a WISP provider as an early local internet connection so that we could start moving away from the satellite technology. So as well as that IT and the networking side, we do a bit of radio stuff or satellite communications as well. So it's the extra T on IT and telecom. A lot of it's around VHF radio, sometimes HF radio, and a lot around satellite phones. So part of the team is, we have a team that's made up of volunteers from up and down the country. When we're deployed, we're on a short-term contract at a small salary so that we can afford to take time off from work or away from our businesses. But it's a fairly large commitment you need to be able to make. As I said, we deploy for about a month at a time. To get into the team, there's various training you have to go through, and one of them is a 2-week-long technical training course, and there are a couple of other week-long courses as well. And we sort of cover MikroTik as a small part of that course, and it's a fair challenge to get somebody up to a certain level, basic level, when they've never seen a MikroTik before. We have other training weekends once they're into the team where we do refreshers as well. So yeah, for people that aren't regularly using them, trying to keep them familiar enough to be able to deploy and get them up and running in the field is a challenge. At the end of the 2-week training course, there's a field sort of assessment where they given some scenarios and they need to set them up, and so 2 of those include using MikroTiks. So this is part of one of those scenarios. A guy studying a MikroTik, wondering what to do with it. And here combining the MikroTik and the Ruckus to provide an overall solution. So that's the big disaster stuff. New Zealand Red Cross being a part of the Red Cross movement. We work with our sister national societies around the Pacific a lot more around capacity building and support, but we also occasionally in disasters. So a lot of what we've done has been around training, but one of the problems we've had is when we often go there, they'll have problems with their IT infrastructure. It's usually very ad hoc. Pretty much any time something breaks, somebody else will come in and do something different to fix it or replace it. So we've been working on a network in a box type solution. We call it ZLT infrastructure or zero local touch. The idea is it will have a lot of remote support. And while a lot of that, for various reasons, we've gone with Fortinet product suite, there is a MikroTik component to that as well. Tucked away in the corner. So this is the box. A lot of as I said, the environmental issues in the Pacific are a large reason we've had to put a lot of work into this to make it very robust to withstand the temperatures and the humidity. And been able to make it as fail-safe as possible. We've had designed lots of redundancy into it, and part of that is the MikroTik provides a backup and out-of-band connectivity solution using a 433 and 3G radio, 4G radio cards. So again, looking forward to seeing how we might be able to make use of some of the new products going forward. And that was a bit of a diagram for that. Right, so I wasn't sure how long it was going to take, but done fairly well to keep on pretty much on time, even with a short interlude. So questions and answers, or if you need to would like to contact me. The team has got a fairly good roster at the moment, and we've got a couple of my colleagues are here in the audience, and one did a presentation at NZNOG, and we've got a few potential recruits from that, so we're not really looking for recruits right at the moment, but if you're interested, then have a chat to me later or drop me a line, and we can keep you in mind for future recruiting requirements. Any questions from the audience? Right, polls. Who's next?